Tonight, let me take you on a quiet journey. A journey into a world wrapped in shadows, where secrets were locked behind steel doors, and where every whispered word could change the course of history. This is not a story of loud battles or roaring machines. It is a story of silence, of tension, of a secret that almost slipped through the cracks of time. In the late years of the Cold War, deep inside a remote archive outside Moscow, there existed a file that officially did not exist. It was kept in a drawer without a label, placed between unrelated folders, as if someone had intentionally hidden it in plain sight. No one signed for it. No record indicated who delivered it, and yet it was always there, quietly waiting for the right eyes to find it. Archivists used to say that some drawers felt heavier than they should, as if the paper inside carried more than ink, more than information. This particular file had that weight. People noticed it, but did not touch it. In the KGB of that era, curiosity was rarely rewarded. One winter night, when a cold wind scraped along the windows, a young officer named Mikhail Petrov opened the drawer by accident. He was searching for something routine, a simple transfer sheet, a document he needed to finish before a midnight inspection. But instead, his hand brushed against a folder that felt strangely warm, as if it had been held by someone moments before. The cover was blank. No number, no seal, no classification mark. This alone made it suspicious. In those years, even grocery lists had stamps. Mikhail hesitated. He listened to the quiet hum of the archive lamps, the distant echo of boots in the hallway, the slow ticking of an old radiator. He knew that if anyone saw him holding an unregistered file, questions would follow, the kind of questions no one wanted to answer. But something about this folder pulled him in, a quiet gravity. When he finally opened it, he found only a few pages, yellowed, uneven, almost brittle. The first line was written in a steady, deliberate hand. Project Sokol. Authorization, Level 0. Mikhail frowned. He had never heard of Level 0. Even the highest operations had numbered classifications. But 0 implied something different. Something beyond structure, a project above the system itself. He turned the page. There in the center was a simple diagram. At first glance it seemed ordinary, lines, shapes, and handwritten notes. But as Mikhail leaned closer, he felt something unsettling, as if the drawing was familiar, though he had never seen it before. The notes spoke of a device, not a weapon of destruction, but a weapon of control, silent, invisible, and capable of influencing what a person sensed or believed they sensed. It was not about harming the body, it was about touching the mind. And in that dimly lit archive, Mikhail suddenly felt something he did not expect. As if the room itself exhaled, he closed the file quickly, but the silence around him no longer felt empty. It felt aware. And this was only the beginning. Mikhail sat with the folder in his hands for several long seconds, feeling its weight settle into his thoughts. He knew he should put it back immediately. Close the drawer. Forget the strange diagram, the unfamiliar classification, the quiet sense of unease spreading through the room. But the mind, once awakened by curiosity, rarely goes back to sleep so easily. He glanced over his shoulder. The hallway beyond the door remained empty, washed with dim yellow light from old Soviet lamps. Somewhere farther down, a cleaning lady pushed her mop, humming quietly to herself. No one else was on this floor at this hour. The senior officers hated late shifts in the archives. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Mikhail turned another page. This time, there were no diagrams, only descriptions. Preliminary tests confirm auditory displacement within controlled parameters. Subjects report hearing structured content where none exists. External recording equipment detects no sound. Lines of text, calm, clinical, but hiding a quiet tension beneath the surface. Mikhail whispered the phrase to himself. Auditory displacement. Could such a thing even be possible? A sound that wasn't a sound. A voice that could be heard, but never recorded. He felt his pulse slow as he read, each sentence sinking in like a stone into deep water. Operator proximity, 30 to 50 meters. Influence radius, adjustable. Recommended use, interrogation, suggestion, influence. A weapon not aimed at the body, but the perception of the mind itself. Suddenly, a soft click echoed behind him, the sound of the archive door settling in its frame. Mikhail froze, but it was only the draft. The old building moaned and shifted often on winter nights. He allowed himself to breathe again. Another page. This one appeared older, typed on a machine with misaligned keys. The words were faint, uneven. Prototype stored in observation room No. 7. Direct testing suspended after incident 14. Access restricted until further review. Observation room No. 7. Mikhail knew the place. Everyone did. It was the room no one used anymore. A small chamber in the basement with thick concrete walls and an observation window that had long since fogged up from age. Officially, the room was under maintenance. In reality, no one wanted to be near it. Some said the lights flickered there even when the power was stable. Others whispered that you could hear tapping behind the walls, though no pipes ran through that section. Mikhail had always dismissed these stories as superstitions, old tales passed between board officers during night shifts. But now he wondered, was the prototype still there? His fingers tightened on the edge of the folder. The text seemed to glow softly in the warm lamplight, drawing him deeper into its secrets. The last page held only 2 lines centered on the paper. The effect persists after deactivation. Duration, unknown. A chill moved gently across his back like a slow breath. Persisted. After deactivation, what kind of device continued working after it was switched off? He closed the folder, trying to steady his thoughts. The story it told felt unreal, like one of the strange dreams that visit you just before sleep, the ones that feel familiar even though they make no sense. But the folder was real. The words were real. And if the prototype was still in observation room No. 7, then someone at some point had built this thing. Outside, the building groaned softly as wind pressed against the walls. The clock above the door ticked in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. For a moment, Mikhail wondered if the archive itself was listening. Quietly, carefully, he slipped the folder under his arm, turned off the desk lamp, and stepped into the hallway. The shadows stretched long ahead of him, and somewhere below, room No. 7 waited. The stairwell leading to the basement felt colder than the rest of the building, as if the air itself hesitated to travel downward. Mikhail moved slowly, keeping his steps soft, the dim light above him flickering in a gentle, irregular rhythm. Every time it blinked, the shadows shifted on the walls, long and thin like stretched silhouettes. He held the unmarked folder close to his chest. He wasn't supposed to be doing this. He knew it. Every officer in the KGB was trained to avoid unassigned tasks, unexpected directions, unexplained impulses. But something about the file, something quiet and insistent, kept pulling him forward. When he reached the bottom of the stairs, he paused. The basement corridor stretched into darkness, its length illuminated only by a few old bulbs that buzzed softly, like insects trapped in glass. The air here smelled of dust, concrete, and something else, a faint metallic tong, like old machinery left unused for too long. He walked slowly, keeping close to the wall. Rooms passed by on either side. Room 2, storage. Room 3, maintenance. Room 4, decommissioned. Signs that were barely readable, some tilted, others scribbled out over the years. But room No. 7 had no sign at all. Just a door, heavy, windowed, silent. Mikhail stopped in front of it. For a moment he simply stood there, letting the stillness of the corridor settle around him. He could hear his own breathing, slow and steady. He could hear the faint hum of electricity in the walls. But then, something else, a faint tapping, very soft, as if someone were gently tapping on the other side of the door. Slow, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Tap, tap, tap. Mikhail closed his eyes for a second, telling himself it was just the pipes. Though he already knew there were no pipes running through this part of the building. He touched the door handle. Cold metal. colder than it should have been. He pushed the door open. Inside, the room was smaller than he expected. Concrete walls, a single wooden chair bolted to the floor, an observation window covered in dust, its glass surface blurred with age. And in the center of the room, on a small table, sat a device. Mikhail stepped closer, the floor creaking gently under his weight. The device didn't look like a weapon. It didn't look like anything at all, really. Just a strange box of metal and old wires, with a small panel of knobs all set to 0. 0, just like the classification on the file. The tapping had stopped now. The room was completely silent. Mikhail placed the folder on the table and opened it to the diagram he saw earlier. He compared the drawing to the device. It matched perfectly. He traced one of the lines on the paper with his eyes, then looked at the corresponding wire on the device. A thought crossed his mind, a slow, unsettling one. How long has this device been sitting here? And why was it never removed? He leaned a bit closer. That was when he heard it. Not tapping, not footsteps, not any physical sound at all. A whisper, soft, clear, inside his mind, yet somehow just beyond it. Don't touch it. Mikhail froze. His breath caught halfway in his chest. He looked around the room. No one, nothing. Just the quiet hum of electricity. The chair, the table, the device. He tried to tell himself it was his imagination, affected by the tension of the night. But the whisper had felt real. Too real. He took a slow step back. The device sat silently, unmoving, innocent almost. But suddenly, Mikhail couldn't shake the feeling that the room itself was watching him. He reached for the folder, ready to close it, ready to leave the basement and forget this entire night. But just as his fingers touched the cover, the light above him flickered. Once, twice, then steadied, and the device, the silent, impossible device, emitted a faint sound, barely audible, like a breath, or a beginning. The sound was so faint that at first Mikhail wondered if he had imagined it. A thin, wavering tone, almost like the soft ringing you hear after stepping out of a noisy room into silence. But this sound, it didn't fade. It lingered, steady and delicate, as if it were waiting for him to notice. Mikhail leaned closer, breath quiet, eyes fixed on the device. Nothing moved. The knobs remained set at 0. The wires hung loosely, untouched for years. There was no switch flipped, no indicator light glowing, number reason for the device to make any sound at all. And yet, there it was, a gentle hum, rhythmic and slow, like a whispering breath coming from somewhere just behind the wall of silence. He swallowed. Maybe it's just the building settling, he told himself, though the thought felt thin and unconvincing. Buildings groaned, creaked, shifted, but they did not hum with intention. He reached out one hand, hovering it over the device without touching it. The air above the metal felt slightly warmer, as if the box held a small pocket of heat inside. Then the whisper returned. Soft, calm, close. You shouldn't be here. The words entered his awareness not through his ears, but directly, gently, into his thoughts, like a memory someone else had placed there. Mikhail jerked his hand back. His heart pounded now, heavy and slow, echoing through the quiet room. He looked around again, searching the dim corners, the dust-covered window, the shadows lining the walls, but there was no one. Only the chair, the table, the device, and the folder beside it. He forced himself to breathe evenly, to stay calm. Officers weren't supposed to panic, especially not over strange noises or tricks of the mind. But the whisper had been too clear, too articulate, too deliberate. He lowered his gaze to the folder. One of the earlier pages mentioned something. Structured illusions of sound, perceived as internal speech. Internal speech, a voice that feels like it comes from within, though it belongs to no one. He steadied himself. What if the device had never been fully turned off? What if deactivated didn't mean what everyone assumed? Carefully, he touched the edge of the box. Cold metal. Silent now. No reaction. He exhaled slowly. His fingers brushed the side and nothing happened. For a moment, relief washed over him. Maybe the whisper had been no more than nerves, an echo of his own thoughts, the mind playing tricks in a dim, lonely basement. But then, the light above him dimmed for half a second. Not flickered, dimmed, as if something had drawn power from the line. The hum deepened, just slightly, and a new whisper slipped into the air, softer than breath. Turn the first dial. Mikhail stepped back at once. His pulse quickened, but something else rose within him. Curiosity again, sharp and compelling. The whisper wasn't threatening. It wasn't demanding. It sounded almost gentle, like someone offering a quiet suggestion. He shook his head. No, he thought, absolutely not. But the device seemed to sense the hesitation. A faint vibration traveled through the table, barely noticeable, like a shiver in the metal legs. The whisper repeated, even softer. Just a little. Mikhail's throat tightened. He stared at the first dial, a small knob marked only with a fading line. He imagined what would happen if he turned it. Would the device make a sound? Would it project another whisper? Or something worse? Something deeper? He took a slow step back, reaching toward the door. But then he noticed something he hadn't seen before. In the dust on the table, thin, undisturbed, untouched for years, there was a faint imprint. Circular, the mark of a hand, but not his. Older, pressed into the dust long ago. And the fingers were positioned exactly on that first dial. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. Mikhail forced himself toward the door, unwilling to look back at the device again. But the whisper followed him, calm and certain. You've already started the process. The hallway outside felt no warmer than the room behind him. And as Mikhail stepped into the dim light, he wasn't sure anymore whether the silence around him was truly silent or simply waiting to speak. Mikhail didn't stop moving until he reached the basement stairs. Every step upward felt heavier than the one before, as if the shadows themselves clung to him, reluctant to let him leave. The folder remained under his arm, the pages pressing lightly against his side. And though the device stayed behind, a lingering presence seemed to follow him, a quiet resonance that made the air feel thicker, warmer, somehow alive. When he finally reached the ground floor, he paused near the main archive hall. The lamps overhead hummed softly, just as before. The familiar scent of paper, dust, and ink greeted him, comforting, grounding. Yet something had changed. The quiet hum from the basement, the whisper from room No. 7, it lingered in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that the device, even in silence, had imprinted itself upon him. A memory of sound, perhaps, or a memory of thought. And for the first time, Mikhail wondered what exactly he had just encountered. He sat at a nearby desk, opening the folder again, tracing the diagram with his finger. The lines and shapes seemed almost alive now, shifting subtly, like ink suspended in water. The notes described experiments, operators, and incidents, one after another, carefully chronicled in clinical, measured language. But as Mikhail read, he noticed subtle differences. Words he was sure he had read before now seemed altered. Incident 14 became Incident 14A. Operator proximity, 30 to 50 meters, became operator proximity variable. It was as if the folder itself responded to him. His hand trembled slightly. This was not a mechanical error. The file was not supposed to change. And yet, it seemed to be aware of his presence. Mikhail leaned back, exhaling slowly, trying to ground himself in reason. He told himself, "It's just stress, just tension, just imagination." He had been alone in the archives for hours, the silence amplifying every creak, every breath, every shadow. But the truth he felt in his bones was something different, something that couldn't be rationalized easily. He thought of the whispers in room No. 7, soft, deliberate, guiding, perhaps not even intended for him, but he had heard them clear as day. And then a memory surfaced, not his own memory, but one suggested by the folder itself, perhaps. A series of old photographs, faded and almost invisible, appeared in his mind. People in uniform, faces obscured, gathered around strange machinery. Hands adjusting dials, bending over control panels, eyes fixed on instruments that seemed to hum softly. A quiet intensity in every posture, a dedication to secrecy so complete it had left no trace in the official archives. And then, one face stared directly at him. Unfamiliar yet hauntingly known. It was almost as if the person was aware of his presence, aware he had just discovered the file. Mikhail shook his head, trying to dispel the vision. But the more he tried to forget, the more vivid it became. He realized the folder had already changed something in him. A small shift in perception, a lingering echo of the device's influence. He closed the folder with care, pressing it against his chest. The room around him felt heavier now, quieter, as if holding its breath. Outside, the lamps flickered faintly, but the shadows seemed deeper. Something in the archive had shifted, not in reality, but in the very fabric of awareness. And in that moment, Mikhail understood. The device in room No. 7 was not just an experiment. It was not a tool for observation or manipulation alone. It was a conduit, a bridge between perception and reality, between silence and thought, between past and present. He had only glimpsed the beginning, the echoes of what had been done, and what could still be done, stretched far beyond the basement, far beyond the walls of the archive, far beyond the folder in his hands. Mikhail took a deep, trembling breath, and for the first time he felt the weight of true knowledge, a knowledge that was both terrifying and irresistible, and he knew deep down that the journey had only just begun. The following morning, Mikhail returned to the office, the folder hidden beneath his coat. The streets outside Moscow were gray, dusted with snow that crunched under each footstep, yet the chill in the air felt insignificant compared to the weight pressing on his mind. He walked with a careful slowness, aware that each movement carried the risk of thought itself betraying him. Once inside, he sat at his desk alone. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead was mundane, grounding, yet Mikhail could still feel the faint, lingering resonance from the device, a subtle vibration, like a memory of sound that refused to fade. He opened the folder once more, tracing the lines of Project Sokol. The KGB documents were meticulous, describing technical details, test results, and what they called auditory influence operations. Every note was clinical. Every line was careful. But Mikhail had already sensed what was not written, the silent implication beneath the text, the invisible architecture of influence that stretched beyond the margins of the pages. He decided he had to investigate further. The official channels offered nothing. The file did not exist. There were no orders, no approvals, no way to request information without raising impossible questions. Everything about Project Sokol was designed to vanish. So Mikhail turned to what he could trust, his own memory, and the quiet guidance of the whispers that had touched him in room No. 7. He began by mapping the incidents noted in the file. Incident 3. Test subject reports hearing voices without sound. Incident 7. Operator experiences involuntary suggestion response. Incident 14A. Device deactivated. Influence persists. The patterns were subtle, yet unmistakable. The device did not merely transmit sound. It projected intention. It shaped perception. It extended its reach beyond the physical confines of the room. Mikhail realized that any attempt to understand it fully would require him to interact with the device itself. He had left it in room No. 7, and yet, in his mind, it remained alive. Every line of the folder, every whisper he had heard, tugged him back. It was as if the device had followed him, invisibly, insisting that he continue. He began compiling a list of potential witnesses, archivists, long-retired officers, technicians, names noted in the file, photographs faintly remembered, voices he had only imagined. If the device had left traces, subtle traces, these people might remember them, or perhaps feel them. Yet every thought carried risk. Even a casual mention could expose him. The KGB valued discretion above all else. and Mikhail knew that to stray from the expected path was dangerous. Curiosity could be fatal. Still, he pressed on. He wrote down observations, cross-referenced incidents, and considered the technical possibilities. How could one create sound that existed only in the mind? How could influence persist after deactivation? How could one weapon touch thought itself without leaving a trace? Hours passed. The office grew quiet. The lamps flickered faintly, and Mikhail felt the pull again, the pull of curiosity, of something hidden, of something alive in the shadows of the past. The folder seemed to hum in his hands. Not literally, of course, but a sense of expectation, of intent, radiated from it. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He tried to imagine the device in the empty room. No. 7. Silent yet alive, waiting for the next step, for the next human to listen. He felt the whisper again, softer this time, almost approving. "You are ready!" Mikhail shivered. He understood that the investigation would not be easy. It might never be complete. But one thing was clear. Project Sokol was not a relic of the past. It was a present force, quiet, patient, days passed, waiting, yet Mikhail could not shake the presence of the device. It had imprinted itself upon him like a shadow he carried everywhere, a quiet hum behind his thoughts, a soft whisper at the edge of perception. Even the ordinary noises of the office, the clatter of typewriters, the shuffle of papers seemed muted, as if the world itself had grown distant, leaving only him and the memory of room No. 7. One evening, under the dim glow of a desk lamp, he opened the folder again. He studied the diagrams, the dials, the notes on auditory displacement. Every line suggested a pattern, a method, a sequence of operations. It was clear the device required interaction, not just observation, but deliberate manipulation. Mikhail hesitated. He knew the risks. He knew the consequences of curiosity, the weight of history pressing down. But the pull was irresistible. It had whispered to him once, gently, and now it seemed to wait for action. He returned to room No. 7 that night. The stairwell felt colder, darker, more alive with unseen anticipation. The device sat where he had left it, silent, inert, yet impossibly present. The air around it seemed to hum faintly, perceptible only to those who had already glimpsed its influence. He placed the folder on the table, aligning the diagrams with the dials. 1 dial, 2 dials, 3. Small, precise movement. The device responded subtly. A vibration traveled through the table, a rhythm almost imperceptible, like a heartbeat beneath the dust. Then he heard it, the whisper, clearer this time. Structured, intentional. Now focus, listen, learn. Mikhail obeyed, even though the words were not spoken aloud. He followed the instructions, adjusting each dial according to the patterns in the folder. The room remained silent, yet he felt a subtle shift in perception, as if the walls themselves were watching, breathing, waiting. He closed his eyes, letting the senses of the room merge with his own. A faint warmth spread through the table, the floor, the air around him. And then the whisper returned, guiding him through a sequence he could neither see nor hear, only feel. Concentrate on the thought, not the sound. Feel it. Mikhail understood. The device did not broadcast sound. It broadcast intention, perception, belief. The first experiment began quietly. He imagined the simplest of thoughts, a color, a shape, a word. Then he sensed it extending outward, a small ripple into the surrounding air, the unseen space that the device occupied. And then, faintly, impossibly, he heard a voice in his mind, not his own, repeating the word he had imagined, clear, precise, and undeniably separate. He opened his eyes, startled. The device sat silently, innocuous, unchanged. But the whisper had grown stronger, more deliberate. It did not demand. It did not threaten. It guided. Mikhail realized something extraordinary. The device could make thought manifest as perception, even in the absence of sound, even in the absence of action. It could reach the mind directly, silently, invisibly. It could influence, shape, and persist. A chill ran down his spine. The implications were immense and terrifying. He stepped back, breathing slowly, trying to steady himself. The device waited patiently, as if it had already calculated his reaction, already known his thoughts. Mikhail understood. Project Sokol was not merely a weapon. It was a mirror, a reflection of thought, of intent, of consciousness itself. And now he was both observer and participant. He glanced at the folder again. The whispers had ceased for the moment, leaving only silence, deep, expectant, and alive. He knew he could not leave the room. Not yet. Not until he had learned more. Not until he understood the quiet power he had awakened. Mikhail sat alone in room No. 7, the folder open before him, the device silent yet impossibly alive. He had completed the first experiment, felt the subtle reach of thought projected into perception, and understood the device's potential. It was not a weapon of fire or steel. It was a weapon of mind, a bridge between thought and reality, a whisper that could echo in the deepest corners of consciousness. The room felt smaller now, heavier, yet strangely intimate. Time seemed to bend, stretching seconds into minutes, minutes into hours. Outside, the world continued as always, the streets of Moscow, the distant hum of cars, the indifferent snow. But inside Rome, No. 7, the past, present, and possibility merged into a quiet tension that made every breath feel alive. Mikhail reflected on the warnings in the folder. The effect persists after deactivation. Duration unknown. The whispers he had heard, the subtle influence that seemed to follow him, were not gone. They had not left. They had become part of him. He touched the device lightly, almost reverently, and felt the faint hum under his fingertips. It was not dangerous in the immediate sense. It was patient. It was aware, and it waited. The thought struck him, unbidden. The device could be used for good or for harm. It could guide, instruct, and protect, or it could manipulate, deceive, and destroy. The power was immense, frightening, and utterly silent. Mikhail exhaled slowly. He closed the folder, pressing it against his chest. He could not yet take it with him. He could not yet reveal it to the world. He could only remember, observe, and prepare. And yet, even as he tried to leave, a faint whisper brushed the edges of his mind. Soft, gentle, endless. Do not fear, but do not forget. He paused. The words were not spoken aloud, yet they carried clarity. A reminder that the device, Project Sokol, the secret of room No. 7 would remain. Waiting, watching, teaching. Mikhail left the basement slowly, feeling the cold air against his face as he emerged into the quiet streets. The snow crunched beneath his boots. The city lights glimmered through the gray evening. Everything appeared normal. Everything appeared still. But he knew better. The whisper never truly ends. It lingers in the mind of those who hear it, in the folds of thought, in the spaces between sound and silence. The secret of the KGB, the weapon that touched perception, was alive, timeless, patient, and eternal. And as Mikhail walked home, the faint echo of a whisper followed him. Unseen, unheard by anyone else, a voice that promised knowledge, danger, and the quiet thrill of a truth too powerful to ignore. He smiled faintly, shivering in the cold night air. He had glimpsed the edge of something impossible, and he knew with certainty that the story had only just begun. The folder rested against his chest. The device waited in the dark, and the whisper would never end.